The Catholic Echo podcast is a weekly podcast discussing what's happening now in the Catholic Diocese of Youngstown. Bishop David Bonner and members of our diocesan community discuss your burning spiritual questions. The Catholic Echo podcast is produced by the Communications Department of the Diocese of Youngstown with support from the Annual Diocesan Appeal. It can be found on catholicecho.org, Facebook, and YouTube. Your host is Collin Vogt.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Echo podcast. I'm your host, Collin Vogt, and today I am joined by our Diocesan Director of Music, Mr. Ralph Holzhauser. Ralph, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, Collin.
Thank you. Today we have a very special episode, but before we launch into all that, I just wanted to ask Ralph to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his work here at the diocese and beyond, because Ralph is a very in-demand artist at the moment as well.
Oh, man. I always get uncomfortable when people say, you're so in demand. I just to try my best.
Okay, you're not
for
in
the
demand.
People. Okay, perfect. That's very awesome. So I'm the Diocesan Music Director of the Diocese of Youngstown, which means basically I am overseeing all of the churches musically, and I'm helping anybody that needs help in a musical way. Priests need something, musicians, hiring of musicians, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I'm also in charge of all of the diocesan events at the cathedral, and sometimes I'll be going out and helping with events that might be happening at, say, another church. And so there's a lot that goes on in that particular facet of the job. And there's, of course, the office work as well. I'm in the office doing lots of crazy stuff, and there's never a normal day, really. And then also being at the cathedral, you know, I'm there for all of the masses, funerals, weddings, just kind of like a normal church job, except, you know, the level is rather high, and it's really kind of awesome in a lot of ways. And kind of outside of that, the cathedral and the church thing, I'm also the organ professor at Franciscan University of Steubenville. I have a studio of 9 students, which is actually kind of large in terms of like the organ world now. And they are fantastic players. Really, they make me really go practice.
I gotta stay
better.
ahead of these
Yes,
guys.
absolutely. They're a real delight to work with. My hope is that they will take some of the jobs in the diocese, because we are in need of fantastic musicians to come in, you know. As much as there is a priest shortage, there's more of a musician shortage, you know. And
it's interesting that there's that kind of overlap there of, like, you know, the priest thing is something we hear a lot about, you know, but then there is just I don't want to say a vocational crisis, because we think of that as just like the priest thing, but just any kind of vocation like that of being of service to the church too is in need.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And so you're not busy enough with all that, so then you also go on the road and perform.
I do. So I just got signed to 7 to 8 artists, which I'm very proud of, because there really are not a lot of organists or musicians by any standard that have artist management. You can maybe imagine my surprise when they reached out to me, and I was just like, I'm like, well, yes, I'm very busy, but I would love to be a part of this. So it keeps all of the facets moving, and you know, they kind of clash with each other in a lot of ways in terms of like scheduling and stuff. But there's a lot of fire and passion there, and whenever something great is about to happen, you really feel that. And it's inspiring in a lot of ways, even though you don't get a lot of sleep.
Unfortunately, that's true. It's very exciting when you feel like you get that sense of alignment, you know, kind of like spiritually and physically, in a sense that, like, I can't say no to this. I have to do this. I have to say yes to this. I have to, you know. And then you're like, oh, hang on, I forgot I need to schedule some sleep.
Yeah, well, you know, the caveat is, you know, do it while you can. You know, I'm only 31, so I have energy, but, you know, I were maybe 40, the word no would exist a lot more in, you know, the vocabulary.
Well, you know, that's the great thing about youth. So you were telling me kind of before we started that the performing side of what you're doing right now is a little bit newer to you. What do you enjoy most about your work right now? Is it the performing? Isn't the helping churches kind of around the diocese get their music programs going? What do you find really rewarding in your work?
There's little bits and pieces of each one, I think, you know, like the performing. I mean, there's a lot of incredible churches that I get to go perform in. And, you know, with the artist management, they help get those awesome gigs, but the thing people never will really understand is that you actually have to do a lot of the work yourself and reach out and say, and then you have to make an advocate for yourself. You know?
Really.
The going to, like, I'm going to Saint-Rouen, which is an hour outside of Paris in August, which is probably, like, in my opinion, the greatest instrument and one of the most recorded instruments on earth.
Really?
I mean, because it is just that good. I'm also going to go play at one of the big Episcopal cathedrals in Seattle. I'm going to go to Ely Cathedral in London, which is going to be awesome in 2026.
Wow. So you're already booking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's so that in itself, just walking in a church and being able to play, and that's a huge passion, is being able just to hear this incredible and ancient music in these spaces, because the organ is important, but also the space is equally as, if not more so, important. So
Yeah,
the playing has been always a huge thing for me. So that is a huge passion. But there's also something to be said about playing for the liturgy. I mean, I never thought I was going to really be doing any of this performing at all,
Yeah.
Ever since I was 5, I was playing in a huge church, thinking, just going to be playing hymns, and seeing and feeling the connection of the music to the spoken word in church. That also hasn't really gone away either.
Yeah.
And of course now, seeing younger students come in not knowing really anything, and giving them, a piece that might be well out of their reach, but at the same time teaches them the technique they need to know.
Yeah.
And also has a connection to the sacred music, because that's what I do, especially at Steubenville. That's also really rewarding too. So there's a lot of passion and a lot of enjoyment in all of the facets. Of
it all kind of ties together for you.
Absolutely.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
I think there's starting to be a shift back towards more traditional liturgy. I think younger generations, where both millennials and Gen Z as well, is wanting a church experience that feels different from every other experience they have. And, as you mentioned, you have 9 students at Steubenville, and that's, a great class size. Do you feel that am I accurate in picking up that there's sort of more of a desire for traditional liturgical music, or, just a traditional mass that you're seeing?
I think you're actually spot on. There's a lot of kind of debate whether or not, there should be more contemporary music or more traditional music in the worship, in the context of worship. Worship hasn't really changed in the Catholic Church for a long time, has it? We have a storied history, and the right is the right, and that's just it. So, there's also the thought process of, like, why in the world would we be using guitars, And why would we be using those kind of funky songs that, like, really take away from kind of what I think you are hitting on, which is there's like a lot of mysticism that a lot of people are missing out, the mystery. And it's not just this diocese, but it's a lot of dioceses that struggle with that thought process,
Yeah.
And the challenge really is, how do you educate people and say what you're doing, might not be what you should be doing, and instead you should be doing this, because people always have their thoughts, and they're not really well informed, but that's all they know, and you can't fault them for that. So how do you diplomatically say this is what
we're
do?
doing? I mean, as the diocesan director for music, you kind of have the responsibility to set the tone. You kind of have to say, this is kind of what we are wanting to move towards, and people might not like that or might have a problem with that.
Absolutely,
but I think any leadership role comes with also a sense of, you are a servant as well, to the people of the diocese themselves.
Absolutely.
And you can only do what you think is best for them,
Yeah, it's a fine line to walk. And, I have said for a long time, well, we need to start with Cathedral, and I'm all over the place in the diocese helping in any way I can, but make this the model. And we can go from there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of making this a model, you just had a concert in May.
Yes, it was a great concert.
So tell us a little bit about what that concert was for and some of the pieces that you played.
Basically, one of the things as the mother church of the diocese we should be doing is having concerts. Why would we be having concerts at the cathedral? Why should somebody be pushing this? Well, look at Youngstown, first of all. It is an area starved of the arts. And, well, I guess there's a lot of arts it needs, but you really don't see much classical music. We have Stambaugh, but even they're going through kind of some rough patches themselves. So I thought, okay, so we have a great instrument here, a great organ. Why not start to invite people here for organ concerts?
Yeah.
Which is hard to sell no matter where you're at, because people have a lot of thoughts about even just walking into a church, especially nowadays. So how do you sell that to people? So we've been having these concerts every single month starting in January. So we have 6 concerts, and it really works out quite nicely in a lot of ways. Even if like 4 or 5 people show up, it's still there. And then sometimes 30 people show up. So it depends on the day, but it's at least there for people to have. Now, this concert that happened in May, that was a very, very, very big kind of leap because that combined 4 different orchestras,
Oh my
Butler
gosh.
County, Youngstown,
Yeah.
Warren Philharmonic, and Greenville Symphonies all together up in the choir loft, and there were 2 organ pieces featured. So the Poulenc Concerto, which is a very, very famous piece, and the lesser famous, but kind of in a lot of ways much more epic piece, Guillemot's Organ Concerto, which is
Yeah.
based off of like an organ solo work, but just made for the actual orchestra. I mean, boy, was that an incredible concert. There were about 200 people that showed up.
Yeah,
and
amazing.
we competed with the Vindies, and so
Oh.
we did a pretty good job on that same night. And you should have seen the colors just in the cathedral with the sun, and there were a lot of first-timers there. And really, it was a pleasure to play, and it was a pleasure to put together.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work, actually, on top of everything else. But
I'm going to go off on a little rant.
Go for it, yeah.
About, I feel that there's been sort of a de-emphasis on incorporating all of the human senses in America in liturgical experiences or just in worship, and I think you really don't always recognize like just Protestant influences sometimes. The last time that we talked, I interviewed Ralph for an article in the Catholic Echo magazine. We were talking about a lot of the, popular church music was written by Protestants or, other evangelical composers or whatever. And that's not to say it's bad. But as Ralph was saying earlier, having the music combined in a space, so we're combining the oral experience with the visual experience, and it becomes more than the sum of its parts. It enhances it even further. I was just at Mass at Friends Church that's pretty traditional, and they had incense, and so then I get the smell, and like it just activates something, that we are physical beings, but we can sort of glimpse the spiritual through those physical encounters that we have as well. Like you say, I mean, there's really something about that beauty in the space, and that is a Catholic thing.
Oh, yeah.
The feeling that the physical beauty, the enjoyment of music, those things, the idea that those are distraction is a Protestant idea. You go in some of the churches, I've been fortunate to see a lot of churches in Europe, they're just astoundingly beautiful, and it just brings your awareness up a little bit, so I'm very glad that we're doing these concert series here. To get into the next stage of our episode, we're very excited about this. Ralph and I have been talking about this for a couple of months. As you can all hopefully hear, Ralph is incredibly knowledgeable about liturgical music, you might say. And I asked Ralph just to choose a few songs that he is passionate about, that he finds really interesting or enjoyable. And we are going to introduce them, talk about what makes them interesting, and play a brief selection for you, and then kind of break it down. We want to give you guys a little bit more to hold on to when you go into church and say, I know what I'm hearing. I get something more out of this now that I know the history behind it. So we are going to go through some of those examples that he identified for us. So the first song that Ralph sent me was "O God Beyond All Praising." So we'll just introduce it a little bit, and then we will play a couple of minutes from that, and then we'll be back to discuss what you just heard. Ralph, why did you want to talk about "O God Beyond All Praising"?
Well, "O God Beyond All Praising" is a very, very powerful hymn that I find that, especially in cathedrals, we tend to use a fair amount, and even in church, in kind of most normal parishes, that tune seems to be used.
Yeah.
So just kind of a thought about just hymns in general. You might have like the actual title of the hymn, so we have the title, "O God Beyond All Praising," right?
Yeah.
But you also have to think about the fact that there is a tune to that. Anything like "Mary Had a Little Lamb,"
Yeah, yeah.
So the tune name is actually Thaxted. So you could literally have hundreds of other titles, but the actual tune is going to be the same for all of these hymns.
Okay.
So "O God Beyond All Praising" or Thaxted is used all the time in this diocese. I generally use that hymn tune for confirmation. So "O Spirit All Embracing" would be the title of that one.
Okay.
You might use "O God Beyond Praising" for, say, like priesthood ordination or something like
Right,
that. And
okay.
actually that is what we did, which is it in such a powerful hymn that fills the entire church.
Yeah.
So if the listener would maybe kind of think about classical music as a whole, they might also recognize that that tune is actually taken from something. So Gustav Holst is a really famous, classical composer.
Yeah, the planets.
The planets, in
Yeah.
fact, and you can find that in, if I'm correct, am I thinking Jupiter for "O God Beyond All Praising" or Thagsted? So
Yeah.
you'll find that in that particular piece. And
Right.
it always hits me whenever I am, say, like at the Cleveland Orchestra or one of the Pittsburgh orchestras that I've gone to see, and they play the planets. It's like, oh, there you go, And I remember the first time I listened to that tune, I'm like, I think I know that from somewhere, but I
Yeah.
really don't know where. And so then it just happened, and I was like, oh my gosh, I made the connection.
There it
felt
is.
wonderful.
Yeah. So let's play a selection from that, and then we will be back to discuss what happened in it. Okay, so that is an incredible piece. That's, maybe a more full version than what you might hear at, your average parish, but wow, that's just incredible. It feels like going on like a fantasy quest or something,
Kind of,
something
in a lot
like
of
that.
ways, yeah.
Why don't you just break down a little bit for me what's going on there musically? You said that it's a very powerful piece. What do you think creates that sense of grandeur?
Well,
What are some of the music theory kind of things going on?
I don't even know if it's about necessarily music theory in this particular case. I think really if you think about like what the hymn is doing, so you can break up a hymn in terms of its stanzas, right? So you have something along the lines of Bum bum ba da 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 da. 1.
Mm-hmm.
Da 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 da. 2.
Mm-hmm.
Da 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 da. And it goes on for each and every one of those stanzas.
Yeah.
So it kind of tends to repeat itself at the end, right? So we could kind of think about like, well, if you want a little music theory, so we have like an A section, let's keep it basic, and a B section, and then you kind of have a return to the A section at the end. So at that first A section, it kind of soars very, very high to a very high note, right?
Yeah.
And that B section, immediately we're going a lot lower. Finally returning to the A section, which is very similar, and it just soars at the very end.
The contrast
creates a lot of musicality and grandeur. And then also if you're thinking about the words, the lyrics, which, oh God, beyond all praising, think about what is being said and seeing how the music actually relates to what's going on, the text with the actual music, which is kind of the point of it, right? That has a large part to do with grandeur of this piece. Now, there's like a lot of other factors that could happen. So if you're thinking about what you just heard, so you heard a version with timpani and brass, and I think there were some strings in there along with the organ, creates for quite the epic sound, especially in a large space. But say you were just playing this on like the organ, you could really color the hymn, depending on the verses and the text, with different stops to highlight different things, you know?
Right.
So one thing I noticed in that recording is that, you had kind of an epic, slow-moving, at a fair tempo intro. Then, there were kind of accents musically happening with the organ, with the choir. You might notice that things were kind of taken back for that B section.
Right.
And that allowed not only the listener to have a bit of a reprieve, it also kind of accents what might be happening in that B section. And with the return to the main theme in the A section, you're going to have the brass and the organ and everything coming back again. It provides some breaths and some space for the hymn to breathe and the congregation to breathe.
True. What I felt listening to it is like a hint of a sadness in it. There was like, or maybe not sadness, but like a longing or something in there that was like, I'm just imagining this person reaching out for something they want to get, but it's just not quite within reach, that sense of desire for something else. Am I crazy?
I don't know. I don't really feel that in this hymn, you know. I mean, I think it's more a majesty, and I think having pitch and also having heard different versions of the hymn, or just in different keys, we can still bring it back to that. I feel like each key seems to also hold a different sort of flavor and mood. So that might contribute to the longing. I love B flat because it's much more grand and epic. I just feel like if we're there to praise God, that's the feeling, an uplifting feeling is what should be had.
Yeah. Not that it wasn't uplifting, but I feel like, some of the music that I love best, it creates complex feelings, It creates, like, there's a reverence, like you say, a majesty, but also, like, a desire for something more that I'm looking for.
Absolutely.
That search for something. Like, that's why I said it kind of feels like going on a fantasy quest, like, I'm searching. Like, there's something I want to find,
I can feel that, too. I understand.
It's okay that people take different things from it, and it relates to something that you heard 10 years ago that you don't even remember, and it just touches on some memory or something that you have. So you mentioned that this is one that you might hear more commonly at like a priestly ordination. Can you tell us a little bit about the history behind the piece, when it was written, or how long it's been around?
The text actually was based off of a patriotic poem
that
was written in 1921.
Oh, okay.
And then it didn't appear in a hymn form until Ralph Vaughan Williams, not Ralph Vaughan Williams. Ralph, since they're in England, actually took that text and made it into the hymn tune. So Vaughan Williams took that actual tune instead, which he wrote the text, and that's how it actually became the hymn itself.
Right.
Being in England, well, Anglican, right? So then we took that and made that into a little bit more of a Catholic thought. Yes.
Very good. Well, that is a great piece to start with, because I think it's fairly familiar to a lot of people. Unfortunately, having to conclude our episode, this was a wonderful time. I hope that anyone listening really got something out of the music that you might hear at church, and treat it as an invitation to come to these concerts that we have here at Saint Columba Cathedral, because Ralph will be there.
Yes.
And he will introduce you to some amazing music as well.
Thank you. And also come to like the diocesan events. Those are, you know, we do our best to enhance the worship where we can. And, you know, especially at those big diocesan events, that's where you can really, I always say you can have a little bit more fun, but you can really beef things up a lot more. And it really just is gorgeous.
So here in July, when are some events coming up that people might be able to look out for?
So our concert season, you know, is over officially in June. So usually during the summer, there's really not too much going on, but usually all of the concerts are going to be broadcast, you know, on the website. You know, I have great things in store for this upcoming year. I have a lot of international organists who want to come and play, the budget depending, but I also want to talk to local people. It really needs to be the full picture so we can support here and then also bring in just to get more people.
No, I think what you're doing is a great thing for us, because it's making Youngstown a hub for this great music.
We need this.
And it's a wonderful thing. So thank you, Ralph. Thank you for being
Absolutely.
here today. Thank you for all
so
you
much,
do
Collin.
for the diocese.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Catholic Echo podcast. To keep up to date with our episodes and for more information from the Catholic Echo, go to catholicecho.org.
The Catholic Echo podcast is a production of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Youngstown. Have a blessed day, and may God be with you.